Okay, everybody, thanks so much for being here tonight. You're watching Do You Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. I want to thank you all so much. We have a great guest tonight, but first, for any of you who are watching the show for the first time, if you would please subscribe, I'd appreciate it. And please don't forget to give the show a like. So my guest tonight, let me show you the banner. My guest tonight is Kathleen Marden. Now, her latest book, or one of her books, she's got 5 books. This one is Captured, and it's on the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, and Kathleen is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And Kathleen's website is kathleen-marden.com. She is a leading investigator and historian of UFOs and contact phenomena. She is the author of several books, and I have her books here, plus the one that I'm showing with her picture. Let me go back to this. She has earned a BA degree in social work. She is a practitioner of regression hypnosis and quantum healing hypnosis techniques. Her interest in UFOs and contact began in 1961 when her aunt and uncle Betty and Barney Hill had a close encounter and subsequent abduction in New Hampshire's White Mountains. 59 years ago in 1961, after the UFO abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, more and more people were convinced that UFOs are real. Now, the 1961 abduction of the Hills stirred worldwide interest. It also became a target of debunkers who still attack it today. And tonight, Betty, like I said, who was the niece of the Hills, will talk about their story. So let's bring Kathleen on. Let me bring her on. Hey, Kathleen, thank you so much for bearing with me and for coming on the show with us tonight. I so appreciate it, and I know my viewers appreciate it as well. So, Kathleen, do you want to start the show?
Be happy to. I'll start where it's started for me, and that is when I was 13 years old. On September 20th, 1961, I had just returned home from school in the afternoon, and my mother was on the phone with my Aunt Betty. And there was concern. So I was wondering what was going on. I'd never heard a conversation like this before. And when my mother hung up the phone, she said that Betty and Barney had been driving through the White Mountains of New Hampshire the night before when they saw a UFO. Well, that wasn't the word she used. She used flying saucer. That's what everybody called them in those days. And she said that it came so close to them that they were worried they were contaminated. We had a neighbor who was a physicist. And so my mother told Betty that she would call the neighbor when he arrived home from work and ask him what he would recommend that Betty and Barney do. And so she finally did reach him, and he told my mother to tell Betty that if she had a compass, she should take it out to the car to see how the needle would react. Now, he had to know something about magnetic fields and UFOs to have made that suggestion. So Betty did look for her compass. She found it. She took it out to the car. She started at the side of the car, and it just behaved like a normal compass. But then she saw new spots on the trunk of the car. They hadn't been there the day before. And they were shiny. They were shiny and about the size of a quarter or a $50, if you can remember what $50 looked like. And so she held the compass over those spots, and the needle whirled, indicating that there was a magnetic field around the trunk of the car. she just called my mother again and told my mother what had happened. And so I was listening in. I was very curious because I'd never heard about UFOs before. And that is when my mother told me that a few years before that, I believe it was 1958, when she and another aunt were going grocery shopping. They went every Friday evening when their husbands arrived home from work, and they'd go and buy the groceries for the week. We lived in a kind of a rural area, a small town, and they would drive down to the closest grocery store. So on that particular night, they were driving toward Plastow, New Hampshire, when they, about 2 miles from their home, they passed a field. And as they were going by the field, they noticed that there was a very large cigar-shaped craft hovering in the sky above that field. And they saw smaller disc-shaped objects flying around it. And they stopped the car. They knew the people who lived in a nearby house, and those people went out and saw this craft and these smaller ones as well. And, you know, it's funny to me, it's curious that my mother never mentioned that to me or to my brothers. But she had mentioned it to Betty and to my grandparents, apparently. So hearing this and hearing what happened to Betty and Barney, I was really pretty curious and wanted to get down to their house to hear that story for myself. So within a couple of days, we were able to drive down there as a family and went in. When we went in, I remember that Betty handed me her watch. In fact, I have it right here. I'll show you what it looks like.
Oh, you do? Awesome.
There's her watch that she was wearing that night. And maybe you can see that it's set for 5:15. Well, she had wound the watch up at 10 o'clock that night in upstate New Hampshire. And when she arrived home, she noticed that the watch had stopped. And so she decided just to rewind it, set it for the time that it was, 5:15, and rewind it. And it didn't work. It never worked again. And the same thing happened to Barney's watch. So that was very perplexing. What could have caused that? Well, I can tell you what could have caused it.
What?
It was a magnetic field.
But
Probably
the watch...
the same magnetic field that caused the spots and the magnetic field around the trunk of the vehicle.
But they never restarted after they got away from that area.
No, those watches never ran again. Doesn't run today, never ran again. They had to buy new watches.
Wow.
So we're in their house, and Betty's telling us about what happened. And she had already made a report to Pease Air Force Base. Barney was sitting in the living room waiting for Pease to call back. And so my father sat and talked quietly with Barney. And we went out to the car with Betty, and we saw the spots on the trunk of the car. And so I'm one of the witnesses to that, and went back into the house, and Betty told us the story of what happened. And I'll tell you that she also wrote it in a letter to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. But what she put into that report is that she and Barney were driving south on Route 3 through upstate New Hampshire when they were going through Franconia Notch. This craft came down, and it was moving in a zigzag pattern. It appeared to be lighted on only one side, And she said that it appeared to be rotating around in a circle, and it appeared to be large. And so they were watching it as it was zigzagging back in the sky, and sometimes doing a stair-step pattern as well. They finally exited Franconia Notch, and this is where the tourist area starts, the motels and the little tourist kind of attractions for families to go to. Clark's Trading Post, and there was a place called Natureland in that time frame. So they're driving past the Indian Head Resort, is what it is now. It was cabins back then. And down Route 3, and all of a sudden that craft swooped ahead and stopped over the highway. And Barney had to stop the car in the middle of the road so that he wouldn't be underneath that craft. He got out of his car. He took binoculars. He had binoculars because when he stopped earlier, he had taken them out of the car, out of the trunk. They had been to Niagara Falls, so they had binoculars to look at the Niagara Falls. And so he took the binoculars, he opened the car door, he stepped out, and he was looking at this craft. It was huge, and it was hovering, maybe 100 feet above them. And he and Betty at that point could see a row of lighted windows. And Barney described the craft at that point as appearing to be like a huge pancake, just hanging there in the sky overhead, looming overhead. And Betty remained in the passenger seat of the car, looking up at this thing through the windshield. And it was so large, it filled up the whole windshield of the car. And then Barney stepped away from the car, and when he did, the craft moved to an adjacent field that would have been to the east. Barney didn't believe that flying saucers were real. He was trying to identify this. He'd been arguing with Betty that it couldn't possibly be because it was impossible. And so he walked into the field, and this craft came down even lower. And at this point, he could see inside the windows on the craft. And what he remembered initially was that there were figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms, and that the entities appeared to be somehow not human. And all of them were looking down at him. And then suddenly, all but one turned and moved to a panel that seemed to be encircling like a corridor around the rim of the craft, the front edge of this craft. And their arms went up into the air. He could now see them from above the tops of their heads to their knees. And as he was watching them, and the one at the window, he became frightened because something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. And the figure in the window appeared to have a plan for Barney. And Barney thought that that plan was to capture him like a bug in a net. Ooh. He pulled the binoculars from his eyes, and he went running back to the car, screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. Now, as Barney was entering the car, that craft moved in his direction, and he thought that it was directly over the car as he went tearing down Route 3, trying to get away from this thing. He said, "Betty, roll down your window and look up. I think it's overhead." She rolled down the window. She stretched her body out. She looked up and she didn't see the lights that she was expecting to see. All she saw was blackness, and she later realized that was the underside of the craft. And this craft was right over the car. And then she and Barney suddenly heard buzzing sounds, code-like buzzing sounds, striking the trunk of the car in the location where she found those shiny spots on the trunk that caused the compass needle to spin and spin. When they heard those sounds, the car began to vibrate and a tingling sensation passed through their bodies. I felt that tingling sensation, so I know what they were experiencing. It's like electrical tingling all through your body. And the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with very little memory for what had happened in the interim. They heard a second series of buzzing sounds. They didn't see a craft that time. In fact, Barney stopped the car and he said to Betty, "I bet I can make those sounds with this car." He drove the car from one side of the road to the other, and he could not reproduce those sounds. What they remembered at that point was a dirt road. They didn't know how they got there. There were tall trees all around. They remembered a fiery orb that appeared to be sitting on the ground, and they remembered a roadblock, but they didn't know where or when it occurred. They had a feeling like they just wanted human contact. Barney was looking for a police officer to report this to. As they were driving home, they were looking for a restaurant, just anything that was open, and nothing was open. When they arrived home, it was 2 to 3 hours later than they had anticipated for their arrival. And they had driven that route before. And so they had all of these mysteries. Betty's dress, that it was a new dress that she was wearing, beautiful dress. It had been in fine condition when she put it on that morning. When she took it off, when she arrived home the following morning, the zipper was torn. There was a zipper that ran up the back of her dress. There was a 2-inch tear in the stitching. There was a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric. The lining of her dress was torn from waist to hemline. The hem was torn down on that side. She had no explanation for how that had happened. Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to buy new shoes. Later, under hypnosis, they remembered how that had happened. And I can tell you that what happened is they found themselves on this dirt road, and they saw this roadblock, and they were confused. What was going on? Was there an accident ahead? Is that why there were those that red-orange glow that they were seeing? What was going on? And those entities started to approach the car, and Barney said, "It's them." This was brought out later through hypnosis. "It's them. It's the ones I saw when I was standing in the field." And Betty tried to escape. She was terrified. She was going to run into the woods and hide, but she didn't make it. They arrived at her door. She had just opened the door, and there they were to intercept her. They pointed something at her. She lost consciousness for a little while. Barney knew that he had better not fight. He had been in the Army during World War II, and he was a really smart guy too. Barney had a genius IQ. He worked for the post office. They were actively involved in the civil rights movement. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. So they were pretty bright people. Barney opened the door. He stepped out. He had a gun beside him, but he didn't reach for that gun. He was intercepted, and they were just taken down a path to this craft that appeared to have landed. And the way that Barney's shoes were scraped is under hypnosis. He said that he was being supported under his arms, but he felt like he was floating, and only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rocks. That's how the toes of his shoes were scraped. And then he felt them slide up what seemed like a ramp and bumped at something on the top of the ramp. And then he was inside the craft. Now, Betty's dress was torn from waist to hemline, and the hem was torn down. When she decided to fight for her life, she was afraid that they were going to be carried off to some distant planet. And, this had never happened to anyone before, as far as we knew. There was nothing to go on. And so she tried to save her life. And in doing so, she kicked her escort really hard. And that's how that dress was torn.
Oh my God.
Yes. They took control of her again, and she was taken up the ramp. She and Barney were taken to separate examining rooms. They were given a very strange kind of physical examination because these entities appeared to be attempting to determine the differences between themselves and humans. That's what Betty and Barney thought. But I have to tell you, that craft was equipped. It had all of the equipment. It had the table in the examining room. It had like a dentist chair of sorts in the examining room that Betty was taken to first. And they knew what they were doing, these entities did. And they gave Betty and Barney the same types of examinations. They looked at their hands, their feet. They were very interested in their skeletal structure, in their joints and how their limbs moved. They were interested in their nervous system. They did something to their spines that both thought were maybe counting the vertebrae in their spine, and also maybe doing a neurological test on their bodies. And then what happened was they put Betty on the table. But before they did, they removed her dress. And the one who unzipped her zipper did not know how to operate a zipper. And that caused the 2-inch tear in the stitching at the top of the zipper and the tear 1 inch in the thick zipper fabric as well.
Can I just ask one question?
Absolutely. Break in at any point.
Did these aliens communicate with them in any way?
They communicated with them telepathically. And they said, don't be afraid. We're not going to harm you. We only need to do a few simple tests, and then you'll be on your way. And so that's what they told Betty and Barney. They were very reassuring, but Betty and Barney didn't know if they could trust them, because this hadn't happened to anyone before, as far as anyone knew. And so they did, and they put Betty on the table, and the one that she called the examiner produced a very large needle. Ooh. And she said, well, what are you going to do with that? And he said, telepathically, I'm going to insert it into your navel. And she said, no, don't. It will hurt. Well, let me say, in that time, we did not have amniocentesis. It was only under development. And it wasn't used in a hospital until a few years after that, a few years later. But this appears to be the kind of thing that they were doing with Betty. And so he inserted it into her navel, he or she wasn't sure if it was male or female, into her navel. And she felt excruciating pain. And she, during this hypnosis session, was so traumatized that Dr. Simon had to end the session early. But the entity that was standing up by her head, I think he was over on this side, did something and took her pain away. And so she began to trust him. She was grateful that he took the pain away. You know, the examiner finally finished what he had intended to do and left the room to examine Barney in much the same way, except for they took a sperm sample from Barney. And Betty was left in the room with the one she called the leader, who today we know is the entity that takes or is in contact with the experiencer time and time again throughout their lifetime. They have kind of a relationship. He's familiar and makes the experiencer feel comfortable and at ease and in a familiar environment. But so Betty got up, she put on her dress, and she started to look around the room, and she saw a book. And in this book, there were symbols. Now, it wasn't like what we think of as a book today. It was more like a tablet. Because I asked Betty in the year 2001, I believe it was, to sketch those symbols for me from memory. And so she described it. It had a thin, hard, like plastic cover, and she opened it up, and the symbols were like rows of symbols, and they appeared to be embedded in whatever this tablet kind of thing was. And funny thing was, those symbols were published in my book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, with Stanton Friedman, too. And Dr. Don C. Donderi saw those symbols in the book. And he had actually done a symbol study with his students at McGill University. And the symbols that they had to look at were from Bud Hopkins, the late great pioneer abduction investigator. And so Stuart Appel was also involved in this experiment that they were conducting. Dr. Stuart Appel was from the New York State University at Brockport. And so what they did is they had two groups of graduates, or not graduate students, just students. And they had one group of students just sketch what they thought alien symbols might look like. And then they had the other group of students be hypnotized. Stuart Appel did the hypnosis and suggested to them that they were on board an alien craft and they saw symbols and they should sketch them. And so what the scientists did after is they had all of those symbols on this identical paper, and they had them all jumbled up so no one could tell where the symbols came from, whether it was from Bud's experiencers or either group of students. And then you did a statistical analysis on those symbols using a device that Dr. Don Derry had developed. He was a professor of psychology at McGill University. And what they discovered was that Bud Hopkins' experiencers' symbols were very much the same and very different from both of those groups of students. Well, Dr. Don Derry contacted me after he saw the symbols in my book and asked me if it would be okay if he did the same kind of thing with Betty's symbols, to see if they in any way resembled the symbols that Bud Hopkins had been collecting since the mid-1970s. He did that statistical analysis, and he said that Betty's symbols were nearly identical to Bud Hopkins' experiencers' symbols. So there was scientific verification that this had actually happened to Betty and Barney. We had a lot of evidence that has been scientifically evaluated, and even more evidence that will be coming out next spring. We're waiting until next spring to publish it in an update. It's going to commemorate 60 years since Betty and Barney had their experience, and we're going to publish a lot of new scientific evidence and the scientific analyses of that evidence that we didn't have when in 2007 when our book was published. So that's pretty exciting to me that we have even more scientific evidence today. But, you know, Betty and Barney were still on the craft. Let's go back there. And Betty is communicating with the one she called the leader. And she said to him, I know you're not from around here. Where are you from? Where's your home port?
Can I just stop you for 1 second?
Yes.
I have an image of the drawing of an alien that, let me get it, that Barney drew. Hold on.
Okay.
I want to show that to the viewers. This is Barney's drawing of the alien. Okay, there. And then this is what he called his, it was the leader. This was his sketch of the leader. Go ahead. I'm just going to show that to the viewers.
So you can see the leader and the examiner as well were about 5 feet tall. And their skin under the blue light inside the craft appeared to be light gray. But they weren't certain about that because they only saw them under the, outside in the light from the car and on the craft in the blue light. So, but their eyes were larger than human eyes. They came around, they were a little bit slanted, and Betty and Barney remembered them having irises and pupils, very large irises, dark irises in their eyes, and very dark pupils. They had flat noses with just little upturned nostrils and just a slit for a mouth. No ears visible, no hair on the bodies, dressed in these shiny black uniforms, communicating telepathically and being very reassuring. And so Betty had lost her fear. And when she said, I know you're not from around here, where's your home port? He produced a star map. And it appeared to be, three-dimensional, almost like looking out a window. And what she saw were stars. They glowed. There were different sizes and different colors. And there were two in the foreground that were as large as nickels. There were others that were about only the size of a pen, the point of a pen, some a little bit larger than that. Some of them were connected by solid lines, and some of them were connected by dotted lines. And the two very large ones in the foreground were connected by 5 solid lines, indicating that there was travel back and forth between them. And so she looked at the map and she said, where are you on this map? And he said to her, well, can you show me where you are? And she said, no, I know very little about the universe. And he said, well, if you don't know where you are, how can I tell you where I am?
Oh.
Kind of strange to me that he would say that. But it was pretty obvious, I think, that he was from one of those two planet from one of those 2 stars in the foreground. And so then he made this go away, but she remembered it. And under hypnosis, 2.5 years later, Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was a renowned psychiatrist, hypnotized Betty and Barney separately and reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. They ended up seeing him primarily because Barney developed post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of what had happened. Called it something different in those days: conversion hysteria, shell shock, that kind of thing. And so he had reinstated the amnesia so that they couldn't share their stories. That was a good thing because I was able to compare their stories line by line, word by word, to do my comparative analysis of their statements that I've put in the book, so that you'll see what actually happened and what he said and what she said. It's pretty remarkable. So then Barney's exam was finished, and it was time for them to leave. But Betty had said to the leader, can I take this book as evidence? I want to prove that this really happened. And the leader told her that she could take it. But when they were about to be escorted off the craft, there was a little one that she didn't like. The crew members were small. They were about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. Their heads were larger in proportion to their bodies than with the taller ones. And this little one was making like a buzzing sound, a loud kind of sound, I guess. And that's what Betty told me. And then the leader said to her, they have decided that you can't take the book. We've decided that you are not to remember what happened to you tonight. And she was furious. And she said, I'm going to remember this if it's the last thing I do. They took Barney, one of them escorted Barney back to the car, where he sat on the gun when he got onto the seat. And fortunately, it didn't go off. Their little dog, they had a little dachshund dog, was there in the car, shaking.
Oh.
Yeah, poor little thing. And Betty was back arguing, you told me I could have that book. And they just wouldn't let her have it. So finally, the leader escorted her down the path and apologized, sort of. And she said to him, well, do you think you could come back? Because I would like you to meet some other people, some people who might be scientists, who are far more knowledgeable than I am. And of course, she was knowledgeable. She was very bright and graduated from college. She was a social worker. But I think she was thinking about maybe college professors and maybe scientists. And so the leader said to her, oh, maybe we'll come back to see you again. but it's not my decision to make. And she said, well, if you come back, how will you find me? Out of all of the millions of people on this planet, how will you find me? And he said, we can always find those that we're looking for. So I'm wondering if she had an implant inserted that night.
But she didn't ask them, well, how did you find us?
No, she didn't say, how did you find us? You know, it makes me wonder if he had seen her before and she didn't remember it. Because, you know, I'm a researcher. I do a lot of social research. I've been doing research for 30 years now. And I've actually worked on a research project with Dr. Don Derry. And so what we discovered is that the majority of experiencers, at least today, have been taken before the age of 20 for the first time. So here were Betty and Barney in their early 40s. And, you know, it makes me wonder if, you know, Betty grew up on a farm. A lot of farm kids were taken in that time frame. We found out later. I've talked to a lot of them. And maybe she was taken off the farm. Maybe my mother was too, because my mother had that sighting of that large craft. And my mother went grocery shopping one Friday night alone. This is when I was a little bit older. And she didn't come home. And my father was very distressed. She always arrived home at the same time. But this night, she came home very late, not realizing it. She had bought frozen food. She'd bought ice cream. The ice cream was soup.
Oh, my.
She had no explanation for what had happened to her. And we know among our abductee group, at least 60% state that this has happened to someone else in their family. They're aware of that. There are probably others who aren't aware of it.
Yes, I know. Yes, that's right. I've interviewed several people that are alien abductees, and they've been visited or taken several times, and other members in the family as well. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. Wow. So when your mother didn't return, had she any did she know what had happened? Was she able to talk about those missing hours?
She only knew that she had this huge question mark. She didn't know what happened. But Dr. James Harder, who was the chief investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, headed by Jim and Cora Lorenzen. It ran from like 1951 right through, I think it was through the beginning of the 1980s. And it was a large organization like NICAP, but they, luckily, I have to tell you that APRO considered all of the statements. Cora Lorenzen insisted that her researchers write everything in their reports, even the things that the NICAP that had a lot of military people and a lot of physical, material scientists, physicists, that kind of thing. They would leave some things out. And at NICAP, they really had a hard time believing that there were sentient beings inside these craft. They had a hard time believing that anyone had ever been taken to craft. But Cora Lorenzen's group had a more open mind, and actually were, in a sense, as far as I'm concerned, more scientific. than NICAP because NICAP was biased.
Mm.
Well, anyway, Jim Harder was a professor from the University of California at Berkeley, and he taught civil engineering there, but he was also a trained hypnotist. So he went out to my childhood home in Kingston, New Hampshire, and he hypnotized my mother.
He did?
Yes, yes. And this wasn't until several years later, after we found out about Betty and Barney, this was in the 1970s that he hypnotized my mother. And sure enough, she was an abductee too.
So she was able to talk about what had happened. Did you find out what happened to your mother after the hypnosis?
She was only willing to talk about the entity that she liked very much. For some reason, she called him Rupert. And so she had kind of a good relationship with him. And didn't seem terribly frightened about what had happened, but she wasn't willing to talk about what had happened to her on the craft, only that she had been taken too.
Oh, what a shame. When they do these hypnosis sessions, don't they record them?
I'm not sure if Jim recorded it with my mother or not. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
Oh, that's too bad. Did they ever find a chip in your mother?
We didn't look
for
a chip.
All right. So
we didn't look for that in my aunt either.
You know, from what I understand, there are chips in these people. And Terry Lovelace, who I had on a couple of months ago, the only reason he found the chip in him was because he had an X-ray.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
But you can feel them if you're an experiencer. A lot of times they're right in this area of the head. And you can actually feel just a little bump, almost about the size of the head of a needle, maybe a little larger. And if you have a powerful magnet, then you can place it over it. And if it's an older implant, then it might move or it might flutter a little bit.
Wow. How did, now I have a drawing, let's see, of 3 aliens. Mm-hmm. And one, let me get rid of this, hold on. Let's see, 3 aliens. And one looks like a female. Let's see. Okay, there's the picture above. You probably can't, well, I know you can't see it.
I can't see them.
But the image above is the one that Barney drew. And then there's 2 images underneath. And the one is probably a male sideways silhouette. And the other one is a frontal image, and it kind of looks like a female.
I know what you're talking about. Yes, and it does. Because Betty and Barney wondered if the examiner was actually female. And Dr. Simon hypnotized Barney, and David Baker, who was a famous artist from the state of New Hampshire, who was also a member of NICAP, drew those sketches while Barney was under hypnosis describing all of the details of those entities. So that's David Baker's artistic rendition of what they look like. And I have a letter that David wrote to Betty and Barney, and he said that he had used his knowledge of the human body when he sketched those. And, So I know for a fact that those sketches that David drew are not entirely accurate, because these are non-humans. They're not humans. They don't look human. They look a little bit different. I have photographs of them even, and they don't look.
You have photographs of aliens?
Yes.
Real aliens?
Yes.
How did you get them?
Well, because I'm a major investigator. I work on these cases, investigating. I'm a hypnosis practitioner.
How in the world? Well, Kathleen, oh my goodness. Do you share those pictures?
Some of them are when I do lectures. I'm an international, national speaker, and when I speak at conferences, I sometimes show some of those photographs. So I've shown, some, depending on what case I'm talking about, and I've just investigated a huge case that I'll tell you about if you'd like to hear it.
I would love to hear it.
You should actually talk to the witnesses in this case. Do you know who Chris Bledsoe is?
Oh, that name sounds familiar.
Okay. He's a very well-known experiencer in North Carolina. And when he was abducted initially, as far as he knew, it was the first time. He was out fishing on Cape Fear River with a couple of his employees. He owned a construction company, and he ended up being taken. Now, Chris was very ill in that time frame. He had Crohn's disease. He'd been in the hospital with it. And when Chris was returned, he was healed. And this became a big story. It was investigated by the Mutual UFO Network. It's been investigated by John Alexander, Colonel Dr. John Alexander. Grant Cameron, if you recognize that name, has been to Chris's house to interview him. I haven't been to Chris's house yet because of COVID. I've interviewed him. I was interviewed him years ago when we met at a conference, and I drove him, and I was a speaker, but I had my car. So I had a long time to speak with him about his memories. And he still today is sending me a video. He is able to call in orbs, sometimes orbs as large as a car. And he videos them. He's just able to do this. It's amazing what he can do. But these two women are highly respected paranormal investigators, both from the South. And so they would go to old plantations, to battlefields. They would collect EVPs, and very good EVPs from the battlefields and the old mansions, and even had articles published about their work. They were speakers at conferences, respected. And Stanton Friedman actually introduced them to me because he was so impressed with their scientific work. They're both well educated. And so I arranged for them to meet Chris, and they asked Chris if they could go to his house and conduct an experiment. They wanted to set up all of their equipment and see if Chris could call in a UFO for them to see. And so they did. They went and they did this. They're out behind Chris's house. It's about 10 o'clock at night. They have their Bell and Howell video camera set and running, and they have all their EVP equipment. They have their holding cameras as well. They did not have their cell phones, anything that might throw anything off, they leave inside. They don't take anything like that out with them. So they're looking into the sky, and Chris said, up there by the moon, I think that's a craft. And so Pam started to ask questions, and she started to receive answers on the ghost box. And she's holding things in her hand, Ashley is, and all of a sudden, they're really back and forth. They're feeling nauseated, and they're not holding anything any longer. They turn around, they look around, and there's their equipment on the wet ground by a tree, by a bush, by a tree where they have this video camera set up. They're going, what on earth happened? And they pick all of their equipment up. They go into Chris's house, and there is Chris's wife. And she said, where did you go? I've been looking for you. It's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my. Wow. Oh, wow. So they got taken.
Yes, they got taken.
God. And he didn't realize it?
No, the three of them didn't realize it until they looked at the clock, and it became far more interesting when Pam and Ashley went to their respective homes and started looking at the video.
What was on the camera?
The video camera showed first this non-human entity.
No
it's sitting
way.
On the ground, and then it's wearing like something on its back, and it just lifts up off the ground. It's upright, only its legs are straight, but it's bent at the knees, so the knees are out behind it, and it's holding a blue light in one hand, and it's just looking like this, back and forth and back and forth, holding that blue light. And it just was gliding across the screen. Wow. And then I've done a frame-by-frame analysis on this. You see a thin blue light, almost like laser light, across the screen, and you can see breaks in it. So I started looking at the breaks, and on one of those breaks, it looks like an entity that's translucent, and it looks like it's on that beam. And then you see it drop down off the beam and become more solid as it comes closer to the ground. And it's like it's holding a wand in its hand, and it has big floppy feet. I don't know what variety of non-human entity it is. It just has a round head, and so I wasn't able to see the features up close. It was kind of far from the camera. And then, all of a sudden, there's a big flash of light. And when the light flashed, all of those trees looked blue, almost turquoise blue.
Wow.
And there is an entity standing in front of that camera, like as close as I am, as you can see me here. And it was dressed in a black clothing that was like scalloped over and over. It was like wrinkled. It would come around and around and around. And at first, I thought it was a body without a head.
Oh, wow.
I thought maybe it was some kind of robotic entity that had come to get them. But then Ashley and Pamela told me, no, they thought that what I thought was an insectoid's head,
Yeah.
and part of the body was actually a head, and that it was wearing some kind of apparatus on its head, and it might have a human appearance. Pam and Ashley, who have the original film, are doing more analysis on it themselves, but they think that it might appear to have a human type face. And Pamela did encounter human type entities dressed in blue uniforms, the men, two women on the craft. Beautiful looking humans, all about 6 feet tall, eyes larger than most human eyes, chiseled noses on the men. They looked like models, like square jaws, long blonde hair.
That sounds like a Nordic.
Yes, it does. Dressed in blue. And the women were beautiful too. Long blonde hair, kind of dark blonde.
Oh my.
Dark blonde hair. And they were wearing what were like iridescent suits with all of the colors of the rainbow. Very beautiful. And Ashley encountered entities that looked like the ones with the floppy feet, very large feet. They were taken into different portals.
Oh my. No. Well, where do they come from?
They didn't tell them where they originated.
Yeah.
Only they didn't tell Ashley at all. The ones that had a human appearance gave Pamela a lot of information.
Right.
And they said that they had lived on this planet thousands of years ago. And they said there was an environmental collapse, and that this planet could no longer sustain a lot of the population, and that they had developed the technology to travel into space, and that's what their group did. You know, they must have been the wealthiest ones on the planet to have access to that technology. So they left, and they found another planet that is in twilight most of the time. It's in a binary star system, they said, and they come back by Earth from time to time. They do a lot of traveling in space, this group does, and when they come by Earth, they stop and they check up on us. They assist in our development from time to time.
But who are they assisting?
Just to, they're concerned about human behavior.
Huh.
I know how they assist in our development, because experiencers, by our studies that we've done, with PhD psychologists, sociologists, have discovered that experiencers are more spiritual than the general population. They become more spiritual. They become empathic.
Yes.
If your listeners don't know what that means, it's a psychic sense where you can feel another person's emotions. Some empaths can actually feel any illness in a person's body and are able to heal people. But if you're an empath, if you're empathic, you can't harm another human because you'll feel their pain. So I think this is brilliant.
Wow.
The non-humans are doing this, that humans are being changed. Experiencers become more intelligent. Some of them have knowledge that they never learned in school. They become more psychic or intuitive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They know that we are all one. They view the world differently than other people do, than other humans do. And, they're just kinder gentler people, more concerned about the environment, more concerned about our use of atomic weapons and nuclear weapons. And that's what these entities have told experiencers that they've taken year after year for as long as I know. These messages date back to 1954 with a woman named Frances Swan, who was actually working with a Navy admiral and people from the CIA and a representative from the Canadian government as well. And she was receiving these messages telepathically from two very, very large motherships that were out in our solar system, not far from our planet.
So she was picked to receive these messages.
Yes.
Had she previously had contact with aliens as well? Or did all of a sudden they just came to her?
Well, what Frances said is that this is back in 1954, and she was from Maine, southern Maine, and she had gone to the town hall to decorate the town hall for a Halloween party they were having, and this handsome man showed up. She had never seen him before, and they had a conversation about what she was doing, and then he left. And she said as she was driving her car home, there was a craft that was out beside her vehicle. Mm-hmm. And she saw the lights on this craft that appeared to be following her or beside her. And then when she arrived home, the following May, I think it was, she started to receive these telepathic messages. And it was really troublesome for her because they came at all times of the night and day. And she was trying to write them down as quickly as she could. In fact, she wrote a thick packet of these messages down. And then she took them to Admiral Knowles, who lived in the same town. And when he read them, he realized that they were full of scientific information that was way above her level of knowledge. And so he ended up sending them to the senator from Maine, Margaret Chase Smith, and they went, I believe, to the president. They went to the Navy. They went to the CIA. My Aunt Betty actually knew the Knowles people. Admiral Knowles and his wife, after Betty and Barney had their experience, invited them to their house. And so Betty has a letter that Helen Knowles, Admiral Knowles' wife, wrote to her, remembering that time frame. And she said that he had sent all this information to Washington, and Washington top brass had gone up to their home in Maine and had done an investigation. And she even said that she got tired of making sandwiches for all of them when they were doing this investigation. So that's what happened. But the investigation continued, I found out, because I was able to speak on radio shows and say that I was looking for family members who had more information. I wanted to know about Frances Swan, and I wanted to know about Admiral Knowles and Wilbur Smith from Canada and what they were doing together. And their granddaughter came to a conference that I was speaking at. She had a packet of information, and it was the correspondence between Admiral Knowles and Herbert Knowles and Wilbert Smith from the Canadian government. And so I found out what the messages were. And the messages were essentially the same as the messages that are being given to experiencers today and date back to that time frame.
Wow.
And the only thing is that in those messages from 1954, it says that the captains of these large craft were friendly and that they were willing to educate and help Earthlings, help us to develop, help us to with our technology, but no country could supersede another. The technology would be given equally to every country.
All right, suppose... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so they contact, like, normal, everyday people. In your research, of the people that you know of, is there a particular blood type, nationality? Are there age groups? What is there anything that's familiar?
No, we did a great deal of research, and I don't have it in front of me, but we did ask the age groups, of course, how many times they'd been taken, messages that'd been given, blood types. And in terms of blood types, I'll remember it in a minute, but as I'm talking, 15% of the general population is negative. They have Rh negative blood. Now, you've heard about an increase in the percentage of Rh negative blood among experiencers. And we have evidence that on our study, it was 31% among the experiencers in general, but 33% among the abductee group, those who were closest to the target as having UFO abduction syndrome on the American Personality Inventory. So, yes, there is a significantly elevated Rh negative blood type among experiencers, but still O positive was the most common type of blood.
Yeah, that's what I heard. O positive.
Yes, but there's A, there's B positive as well, and A, very tiny percentage of AB. So we found that there was also an elevated number of Native Americans who were experiencers who took part in our study as well. So that was really interesting. The study, the MUFON study I worked on, was only in the English-speaking world, but I'm also on the board of directors of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters. And so we had a much larger survey through FREE. Ray Hernandez is the director of FREE, and he does everything big. So when we published the data, we had 3,200 people, and still their studies bore out the same thing that ours did, a significantly elevated level of Rh negative blood. But we have, I think FREE's study is in Spanish. Ray Hernandez is Hispanic. And so there was that, and I think they went and published it in French too. I know that Ray was working on that. So, but the results are pretty much the same. It's just that free study was more expansive. And in fact, we have a very large book, about maybe that thick, that we've published through free. And all of the results of free study are in that book. It's called Beyond UFOs, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence. I have a chapter in that book on communication with non-humans. And that story that I just told you about, Francis Swan, is one that I wrote about in greater detail in that book. And I wrote about other experiencers too, and what they were told.
How by fascinating.
There's also a chapter on people who have been healed by non-humans. Dr. Joseph Birx from California wrote that chapter with Preston Dennett, who is also a researcher and had earlier written a book about healing among experiencers. So it's really a good book, worthwhile getting.
Now, have you had contact?
I have.
Oh my God! Well, you got to tell us.
I don't advertise it a lot but I can't lie. I don't like lying. So I would kind of skirt around the question for years, and then people would come up to me at conferences and say, you really should tell people that you're an experiencer because it will help so many people. So finally I said, okay, but I want to be thought of as a researcher and not the part of me that's just the experiencer. I don't want to be typecast. But anyway.
Okay, so tell us.
Betty, my aunt, was doing an experiment with a team of scientists. This is back in the mid-1960s, after Betty and Barney had their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. And the scientists would write a script for Betty. And it would be something like, go out onto your porch and send these telepathic messages to these non-humans, asking this craft to come down low over the Barrett farm in South Kingston, New Hampshire, by Country Pond. There's a pond that's my grandparents' farm. And so craft actually did come down.
Oh my goodness. Now wait a minute. Do you think it came down because you were associated with Betty and Barney?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that these non-humans thought she was inviting them to meet the family.
Oh.
This craft landed on my grandparents' farm. A commercial pilot who was returning home from work, saw it coming in. We heard about that from his children the next day. My grandmother saw it out her bedroom window. And so my mother and I had memories of being on the craft. And I remembered being on a table with these people around me. And when I was a teenager, 17 years old, remembering that, I couldn't remember what those entities looked like. And I'm thinking, did my mother arrange for me to have surgery during the night because she didn't want me to be frightened? And so these doctors would come in and do surgery on me. Sounds pretty strange, doesn't it? To think
the aliens did surgery on you?
Well, I don't know what they did to me, but I know I finally had that breakthrough memory where I was on that table and they were around me and they were doing something to me.
Well, did you get hypnotized?
Yes. Later, though.
Oh.
It was later. I was taken more than one time.
Do you have a chip, do you know of?
Yeah.
You do? Are you
Yes.
leaving that chip in?
Yes.
You are. So,
Yeah, because they communicate with me that way.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now, do they ever contact anybody like in the White House?
I have no idea.
I just
I keep
wondered.
trying to send them to Donald Trump. I'm saying, you guys, go get Donald.
Well, it's, also, with all this abuse, human abuse, animal abuse, it's just so disgusting. They must know about that. And it's just a shame. I just wish that they could do something about it.
Yeah, but the military can't do anything. You've seen probably
No aliens. If these aliens could do
films,
huh? I just wish that the aliens could do something about these people that are abusive.
Oh, you're talking about people who are abusive.
Yeah, people who are abusive.
Not aliens who are abusive.
No, no, not the aliens. Yeah. People.
Okay, because some experiencers view it as abuse. Most don't. In fact, we asked the people who took part in our study if they would end their experiencers if they're given a choice, and 71% of the experiencers said no, they wouldn't end it. It was 85% among the abductee group who didn't want to end their contact experiences.
Wow. So they're not afraid. They're not afraid.
Right.
And okay, would any of these aliens who take you up into their craft, would they ever fly away with them? Or you wouldn't be able to survive in their craft?
People have talked about being in craft. In fact, the two women who were with Chris Bledsoe were in the craft. And what Ashley remembered was there was like a table that was like a pod, and there were several of them. There were, I think, 4 in the foreground, and it was in a round room, and then there were longer ones, big ones in the back. And she was told that in order to be transported to where they were going to take them, she had to be protected. And so that she was going to lie down, and they were just going to put her to sleep, and there was going to be some kind of a field that formed around her body. And so that's what happened. And the next thing she knew, she was waking up, and she was where she thought it might be the moon, because there was no vegetation there, and it was all sand. The funny thing is, I hypnotized Pam and Ashley, and they'd had a falling out. They didn't speak to each other after this happened. After they examined the evidence, they had an argument and stopped working together completely. So one didn't know what the other said. That's the point I'm trying to make. And Pam described the same thing to me when they arrived on what they thought was the moon. And there was a large rectangular-shaped or dome-shaped building. They could see into it, but there were like tubes connecting it together, and those tubes were like almost like neon tubes in a sense. They could see colors, and there were also things in the background, like their buildings were very tall, not the way we build buildings, but very tall and narrow is the way Ashley described them. And inside that large building, there were non-human entities, some that looked human, some that looked different. And they were very welcoming, and it was a good experience. The women were not frightened at all.
Wow. Wow. Huh.
And then they took them back to the craft, put them on in. Pam described sort of like magical windows that you look at the inside of the craft and it looks like a solid wall. But then a window can just appear so that you can see out. And, they told Pam that they'd lived here a long time ago.
Really?
That they hop through time and space.
Oh, man, that is crazy.
And they told her they had known her through all lifetimes.
Oh, my God. Have they ever talked about reincarnation?
Well, they told her they knew her through all lifetimes.
Really?
Yes. So, obviously it was one incarnation after another.
Oh my God. Okay, now suppose, I heard about this, somebody tried to do this. Somebody that lives in the city, and they stand there and they look into the sky and they're trying to contact a UFO. Would a UFO come to somebody living in a city, or do you have to be out in the country?
Well, I don't know. Linda Corteil was living in Manhattan when she was taken from, I think it was the 11th or 13th floor of the apartment building that she lived in.
No
she was one
way.
Of Von Hawkins'
How did they do that? Well, they just went in. What did they do? Just go into her apartment and then pull her out?
On a beam of light that went in through her window.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
A beam, an interdimensional beam, goes in. It carries these entities, generally 3, down into the home. They take the experiencer and they all go up the beam. And there were people on the ground on the bridge who actually drew what they saw as they were watching it. Their cars all stalled. Some thought there was a movie going on. They were filming a movie.
So so they've been taken several times. Now, each time they're taken, are they experimented on?
Not necessarily. No. Pam and Ashley weren't experimented on at all on this trip. And the ones with the other groups, like the Greys, not necessarily experimented on. When they had me on the table, they were trying to raise my vibrational frequency. And I had strong tingling sensation all through my body. I did remember having a pinch, like a sharp pain, like in my navel, in that area.
Probably a needle.
Body. It hurt.
Sound like a needle.
Yeah. So they might have been extracting ova. I don't know.
So when they extract these things from the human body, do you know what they're doing with them?
Yes.
What are they doing with it? They're
creating hybrids.
Oh my God. Okay. What can
they're also making a better human, so that some children born to human mothers and fathers are highly gifted.
And how does
Rodwell, the Australian researcher, specializes in these hybrid children, these gifted children who can heal others, who speak some kind of strange language while they're doing this healing over the bodies of people who go to them.
Okay, so
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please finish.
Oh, I was just going to say that the kids tend to be telepathic, empathic, just like indigo children. Can do telekinesis. From what I've heard, from Mary. and what she's written and the lectures and conversations I've had with her. They're quite remarkable.
All right, so they're creating hybrids. Then,
Well,
and is that what you call it? They're creating hybrids with these fluids and stuff that they get from humans?
well, I'm not sure that the ones on this planet are hybrids. I don't know if they've tampered with the DNA or if they've inserted some of their own or anything. If they've used their own DNA, then they have to have DNA like our DNA. Otherwise, they couldn't do it unless they are so advanced they had some kind of DNA splicing, genetic splicing. But on the craft, and David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, and Barbara Lamb have done a lot of research on this, where experiencers see like tubes, very large tubes that are domed on the top. And in these tubes is fluid. And in the fluid are hybrids. And some of the hybrids look like, just look like grays. Some of them look like a cross between humans and grays. And many experiencers have said that they've been taken to craft and they have been given these hybrids to hold. And some of them, when they grow older, see their older hybrid children as well. And so they say that human children are taken to craft to play with these hybrid children. Who, well, I'm not even sure that it's craft. They're taken to an alien environment. Let me put it that way. And they will sit in a circle. And they will have like an orb, like a blue orb, and they pass the orb to one another through their minds. They don't touch it, they just move it from one to the other, and they have a fun time playing that game.
What is a star child?
Well, most people think that the star children are the kids who were born to human parents who have had their DNA upgraded and might have some of this ET DNA. But there has been, as far as I know, no DNA test to prove that. So I'm scientifically oriented. I'm not going to say that they're putting alien DNA into humans.
Okay, I used to have a paranormal team, and one of the ladies that were on my team years ago had a child, a daughter, very, very unusual looking. She was tall, and actually she looked like a Nordic. And I forget her name, the mother's name. It's been so long. Anyway, she said that she got pregnant by an alien. Could that be true?
Possibly. I'm reading a PhD dissertation right now, a thesis, and the graduate student who ended up getting a doctorate in psychology, who wrote this, had interviewed 6 different experiencers, and 2 of them were very tall, beautiful, elegant-looking women. And they said that they were hybrids, and that their mothers had been impregnated by these non-humans. So maybe these are the ones that we think of as Nordics, who might be human actually, but living someplace else now. So maybe that's what it is. And the graduate student had no reason to doubt that these women were telling the truth. They didn't have any psychiatric illness. They'd been through a whole battery of tests. They were just perfectly normal. only that they had these other things in their lives that they knew about, and these special gifts.
Wow. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So why is the existence of UFOs covered up by the government?
Well, it used to be covered up because what could we do about it? They didn't want to panic the population. And back, they set that policy back in January of 1953. I'm a historian of this as well, when some studies had already been done by the Air Force, and the CIA was beginning to get involved in all of this too. And so in 1952, when all of the UFOs were over Washington, D.C., showed up on radar screens, the jets scrambled to try to catch them. They were observed by people who were standing on the ground. There was some concern. And so the government decided that they maybe ought to think about doing a cover-up. They'd already covered up a few other things, like the Kenneth Arnold sighting that went across the nation, around the world actually, and people were really excited about it, but some people were fearful. And there were others, Kenneth Arnold, Roswell, others along the way. But with this one in Washington that was seen by so many people, they had to address that. How are we going to handle the population? And so the Robertson panel was a CIA-funded panel that met in January of 1953. There were government scientists of high standing. One of them even won the Nobel Prize later, and some people from the military who met, and CIA people. And they discussed all of this. They looked at some of the evidence, and they said that because remember, we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union at that time. And they thought that if all of us knew that we were being visited by entities from another planet, that it might be reported all the time, and that if there was a preemptive Soviet strike on the United States, then the phone lines might be jammed by Soviet sympathizers who were reporting UFOs. And so there would be a big hubbub. Everyone would be on the television, on the telephone, or on radio shows reporting it. And so they just made the decision in January of 1953 that the policy was going to be to cover up UFOs. And they had ways that they were going to do it. They were going to use radio, television personalities, scientists, actors, and they were going to publish books, write in magazines, do television shows, where they were going to take credible cases of UFO sightings, and then they were going to bring a scientist on who would offer some kind of common explanation, and that person, who was a credible observer, would look silly and feel silly, and then people wouldn't report their UFO sightings. And they just wanted to remove the public interest in all of this. Another thing that they decided to do, I have the document, is they were going to follow the heads of UFO organizations. So
wow.
They were going to sort of be following them around. And Cora Lorenzen from APRA said that she and her husband Jim had a knock on the door one day, and they were told that they would appreciate if the only reports that they told the public about were those that were identified, or at least have a lot of the identified ones. Well, Coral never did that. She didn't obey what they asked her to do. But, people were followed around, people were debunked. Donald Menzel, who was an astrophysicist at Harvard, ran the observatory there. Also was a closely connected government scientist. He had above top secret clearance. He was in the NSA. He was closely connected to the CIA. And he wrote his first debunking book in 1953, and then went on to appear on television, addressing different, very big UFO sighting cases, and trying to make the people look silly and trying to tell a different story than what had actually occurred in order to re-educate the American public, is what they called it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that went on for a lot of years. But then on December 16, 2017, on the front page of the New York Times was an article about the ATIP program, the Advanced Aerospace Technology Threat Identification. It was Threat Identification Program, and run out of the Pentagon by Lou Elizondo. Do you recognize that name at all?
No.
No, okay. So Lou was an intelligence officer, had a very long history with the military, and he ran this program for a number of years, and it was like a secret UFO program for scientific analysis of UFOs. And as part of that, he was able to get a release of 3 videos taken by the Navy. One was off the coast of California by San Diego, off Catalina Island, actually, where the Navy was out doing maneuvers. So they had an aircraft carrier, they had their jets, and the jets are up there, and on the radar, they see a squadron of extraterrestrial craft that can maneuver like anything on this planet. They had it on radar. It's called the Tic Tac UFO, so you can see that. But they said these craft could hover in the sky for hours on end at 80,000 feet. They can drop in a couple of seconds to 20,000 feet. They can zigzag back and forth in the sky. No human could survive the way these craft travel. And if your viewers are interested in this, you should watch the movie, The Phenomenon, by James Fox. It's just been released. It's on Amazon, it's on Netflix. It was going to be in theaters, but can't be because of the COVID. But it is an incredible movie about the whole history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, right down to the craft seen today. And Tom DeLonge, rock star Tom DeLonge, got permission from the military to form the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, and to have these former high-level government officials and scientists be on this committee, TTSA, and to investigate what these craft actually are and what they do. Well, the one that was at 20,000 feet dropped down to 50 feet above the ocean. And what they could see, these pilots could see, was what appeared to be another large craft underneath the water. And the smaller one was bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball over the other one. And there was a churn in the ocean. And so they have all of that off the West Coast. They also had it off the East Coast. And they had radar video of what looks like your classic UFO in the old pictures that you see dating back to the McMinnville photos of 1950, and then a little bit later taken by a military gun camera in France. Same things. They have the testimony from the aeronautical engineer who was flying one of those planes off the East Coast. They were seen between Virginia and Jacksonville, Florida. And just remarkable, they said that when they finished their maneuvers and they went overseas, the craft followed. These unconventional craft.
Wow.
And then, just fairly recently, within the past year, I think it is, the Department of Defense admitted, the Navy admitted that those were their videos. They took those videos.
Well,
and that they're looking into this now. So we've had disclosure, but everybody just goes on with their lives.
Well, recently, not too long ago, they released a video. It was from, I don't know how they got the image, whether it was from the pilot. It might have been from the pilot or from surveillance with one of our military planes and a UFO. They did show that. I think that was last year. When these UFOs fly in our atmosphere, do they fly singular or in groups?
They can fly in groups, in unison, in and out. My Aunt Betty used to say they never come alone. There's at least two of them. And so, yeah, and they appear, they can't identify a propulsion system. They think that they might fly in a vacuum, that they might just have some kind of technology that moves the space in front of them, so they just glide through it.
Now, there's also talk, I do a lot of shows on strange disappearances. And this David Pilates, you know him, I'm sure, that has done, most of the people have disappeared in national forests. And some say, he hasn't said it outright, but some say a Bigfoot may have taken them. They walk into a portal, and some think that maybe aliens are taking people. What is your thought on that?
Well, I've never investigated a case where a person was taken by aliens from the national forest. I respect David Pilates and the work that he's done, and I agree with him. We don't know what it is. If I were to guess, I would say that maybe they have walked into an interdimensional portal.
Yeah.
And they're now in another dimension.
But
who knows?
Yeah.
A lot of them that have disappeared could have been foul play. People living out there, people with guns, could have been bears, wild animals. But it's too many, and under strange circumstances. I have one of David's books. And in that book, there was a little girl, I think she was about 3 years old, who went missing from her backyard.
Oh, from her backyard. Because most of his cases are from national forests.
Well, she lived on the edge of the woods.
Oh.
So it was all woods beyond that. And so she was taken. They searched and searched. They finally found her something like 3 days later. I think it was. I could be wrong. I apologize to David if I have that wrong. It was a while back that I read the book. But she was in the middle of a swamp, clinging to a tree. Now, she's surrounded by water, and her clothing was dry.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So that's pretty strange. It's, you don't know what happened. Maybe a big Bigfoot took her and put her in that tree. Who knows?
Wow. That's
but it's
crazy.
Mysterious.
Yes, it is. That's fascinating. Well, Kathleen, I enjoyed you so much. You are so entertaining. Your wealth of knowledge is unbelievable. And oh my God, I just enjoyed you so much. What a pleasure it was to have you on the show. Thank you. And thanks for putting up with me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to
Bless you.
Sorry about the problem at the beginning, but those things happen.
Yeah, they do. So unfortunately, I want to thank you again so much. Best of luck. Okay, now I'm really sorry about what happened tonight. I have absolutely no idea. I'm going to have to rethink how I'm doing my show now. I got into another thing on YouTube. I have no idea how I even got there. Oh, so it's crazy. I really enjoyed having her. I really enjoyed her. Kathleen, if you're watching, thank you so much. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Her knowledge is unbelievable, really. Hey, you know what? I don't have my calendar, but my next show, I believe, is on the Zodiac. There's a fella that I found on Facebook, and he contacted me because I made a remark about his Zodiac thing, and he has a YouTube channel on the Zodiac, and it's amazing. So my next show is on the Zodiac and what information he has on the Zodiac. So that's all I can remember. Hey, I want to thank my mods. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here. Renee and Chipateri, I really appreciate it. Guys, Royce will eventually come back. He has a lot of issues. He has a lot of issues. So I talked to him. I have to wait for him to call me because he turns his phone off. He has no internet. He's got a lot of problems. So I think he's going to build a computer, and I'm telling you, he sends me. He was sending me these amazing pictures of things that he captured in his apartment. I am scared to death from this one that he sent me. It is the scariest thing I've ever seen. That if I'd be scared to death if I was him living in his apartment, I said, get out of there. So we're going to do some shows when he comes back. He's got a lot of stuff. Actually, you know what else Royce does? Royce, when we do shows, Royce captures things on the video, and he takes it from the video, and then he dissects it, and then he shows me the image that he captures off of the shows. And he's done that to quite a bit of my shows. So I'm really looking forward to doing shows with Royce. They'll be amazing once he gets back. And oh my God, you guys, holy cow, the super chat money. Hi on Emmy. I'm sorry if I think I misspelled your name, Hi on Emmy, honey, but then I think I got it right. Wow, what's up? That's crazy. Thank you so much. And Lynn Bowling and I Am Alpha. My God, you guys, please. Oh my God. Oh, palpitations. Holy cow. I love you guys. And I hope you enjoyed the show. And thank you so much for waiting. Like I said, I'm going to have to investigate and figure out what's going on with the show. I mean, I can't be going through this. I'm going to have to be doing some practicing, I guess, the program I'm using was working out, and then last show I had issues, but I got it straightened out. And this time it went into a whole different program on YouTube. So I'll get it straightened out. So guys, I love you guys. Thank you so much. It's Halloween, end of October. I love October, and I love November too. So have a great Halloween. Watch your scary movies. I love my scary movies. And I don't know what else. I guess I'll do some shout outs. It's really hard. Royce used to give me all the names. And I know I saw Toll cross in earlier, and I saw Lynn Bowling. Let's do some shout outs. Dolly Webb, Chipateri, Armad, Chrissy H, B3 Airspace, I Am Alpha, Renee McDowell, Armad, Zoe Small, Jimmy Cortez. Hi, honey, how are you? I hope you're doing better, honey. Jimmy's mom recently passed away, and that was the love of his life. And really, Jimmy, we love you, and our hearts go out to you, honey. Raymond Duncan, Sandra Miller, Lori Miller. There was a Mills Blues earlier. Anybody else want to shout out? Carl White should be there. Sun. Hey, I Am Alpha. Hi on Emmy. Thayer. Oh, thank you. Hey, don't forget, would you guys subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel? Also, when you subscribe, if I did send out emails, I sent out 200 emails, but all of you, like only 20, clicked on it. So you're better off just subscribing to the channel, because then you'll get notified in your email that I'm going live. How did you guys find me anyway? I wasn't on the thing that was set up on YouTube. How did you find me? And then I saw in this other thing that I'm on, it said, "Hey, come over here." How did you find me? And I forget who it was that found me. Because Anita Ackerman, hi honey. I know it wasn't on my original event. It popped up on YouTube. What, on the front page? I was live on the other side? Really? I have no idea how that works. You got a notification. Live shows pop. So you guys went to my front page? Well, that's the best thing to do. If something here doesn't work, then go to my front page. Twitchy. Yes, thank you for Royce. Guys, please be safe out there. I hear the news every day, and we're in dark times. I don't know if all of you believe it or not, but try and stay safe. We are. We wear masks. In fact, my son came over the other day and we had masks on, and we made him stay 10 feet apart from us. Mom, Matronista Forever, Karen Nash Collins, the Haglin. So, my son works. He's a federal police officer in the airport, and I don't believe they. Excuse me, I don't believe they wear masks. I know they're tested all the time, but still, he's out in the public and he's out in that airport. So we're very careful, because I sure don't want to get it, and neither does my husband. Just be safe, everybody. I want to see you back here in 2 weeks. Hi, Susie Cheryl. All right, guys. Pinata Samurai. Hi. So guys, thank you so much for being here. You know how I appreciate you being here. And happy Halloween. these aren't happy times, but we have to make do with what we have. Zelda's Ghost. All right, I'm going to go, and I got to figure out now how to end this. Yeah. Same to you, Alpha. Everybody, group hugs to everybody, and take care of yourselves, guys. Really, please. So I'm gonna go. I got to figure out how to end this. And again, thank you so much for the super chat money. That was above and beyond. I mean, I almost had a heart attack. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna say goodnight. Okay. So I'll see you in 2 weeks. I don't have my calendar. I think it's 2 weeks. So I'll be seeing you, and I love you guys, okay? Love to you all. Good night, everybody. Thank you. All right, let me see how I can do this.